Okay, so.
You're good.
Okay. So let me start off with the fact that Jeremy's all in all a great guy. He's good at school and he's a good mentor. Just someone to look up to and go to when you need help. And finally, he's a great athlete. He's an essential player for the soccer team and the tennis team. Maybe not so much for the basketball. But he always has a clear mind and never gets mad at his team or players. So here's Jeremy number 1, buddy.
So my CES is on my brain, the topic of mindfulness. So in order to speak about mindfulness, it's crucial that everyone understands mindfulness under one definition. It can be defined in a variety of ways, often separated into an Eastern way of thinking and a Western way of thinking. The Eastern concept of mindfulness is one that's more commonly used in the field of sports psychology. It can be defined as the non-reactive awareness and unconditional acceptance of whatever arises in the present moment. So, the question that I aimed to answer was, where can an advantage in athletics most easily and effectively be gained? In my brain, I sought to prove that the answer is mindfulness. Athletic training can be separated into two distinct categories: physical training and mental training. As far as physical training goes, most athletes willingly prepare their bodies to excel. They know to work hard in practice, lift and stretch, and make smart choices about nutrition and health. And that's just how it should be. After all, physical training is essential to maximize quantifiable traits such as strength and speed. The problem is that everyone does this. Some people might be better than others at preparing their bodies to excel, but nonetheless, everybody prepares their bodies. It's incredibly difficult to gain an advantage by exploiting a universally practiced mode of performance enhancement. In order to gain an edge and separate from the field, it takes unique, individual-based training. I found in my research that mental exercise centered on the theme of mindfulness is the most underutilized, effective tool to boost performance. So I'm going to show a video on the mental side of training. It's a scene from Kung Fu Panda, where the main character, the panda, aspires to be the ultimate dragon warrior, but his lack of mental training prevents him from progressing. Everyone here.
I think there's an audio jack on the ground if you want. There's an audio jack below the desk.
Let's start it again. Justin, is there a light to turn off over there? Is there a light switch?
Yeah.
I see you have found a sacred peach tree of heavenly wisdom. Oh.
Is that what it is? I'm so sorry. I thought it was just a regular peach tree.
I understand. You eat when you are upset.
Upset? I'm not upset. Why would you think I'm upset?
So why are you upset?
I probably sucked more today than anyone in the history of Kung Fu, in the history of China, in the history of sucking.
Probably.
And 5. Man, you should have seen them. They totally hate me.
Totally.
How's Shifu ever going to turn me into the Dragon Warrior? I mean, I'm not like the 5. I've got no claws, no wings, no venom. Even Mantis has those thingies. Maybe I should just quit and go back to making noodles.
Quit, don't quit. Noodles, don't noodles. You are too concerned with what was and what will be. is a saying. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it is called the present.
Not sure how to open up
The
On the bottom.
red one.
Last one. There you go.
Yeah. If you click the one that says Kung Fu Panda, maybe. F5.
Oh, F5. There.
So how can it be proven that training in mind, or rather, that video showed the panda's coach, the turtle, coaching him in a very specific way. In response to the panda being stressed about not being as good as the other dragon warriors, he says, "Quit, don't quit. Noodles, don't noodles. You're too concerned with what was and what will be." Essentially, the turtle advises him to just accept himself in the present moment, very much in line with the Eastern definition of mindfulness, where acceptance, regardless of context, is of utmost importance. So, how can it be proven that training in mindfulness is an effective means of performance enhancement? The truth is, it can't be proven through observation. It's impossible to pinpoint the effect of one training method, because there's so much going on in the life of an athlete and a team. The best way to track the connection between mindfulness and performance is through professional examples of athletes and coaches who utilize mindfulness. Before going into specific athletes who use mindfulness-based training, I want to explain how I went about my research. Even though my topic of mindfulness is about an abstract, subjective way of thinking, like most concepts in life, in order to prove its practicality, I still have to take a very scientific approach. I needed to get as close as possible to identifying a direct cause and effect type of relationship. The scientific method is the go-to approach when finding cause and effect. For those of you who aren't familiar with the scientific method, it involves manipulation of one variable, the independent variable, and measurement of how that change in the independent variable affects another variable, the dependent variable. So in the case of how mindfulness affects sports performance, mindfulness is the independent variable, and the level of sports performance is the dependent variable. I chose to quantify the dependent variable of sports performance with the number of championships won. After all, winning the Super Bowl, the World Series, the Stanley Cup, or the NBA Finals is for most people the ultimate standard of achievement. The hardest part about my research is that many factors go into how professional teams perform. In other words, the constants surrounding the team are always changing. There are always things that the scientific method can't account for. The roster is always changing, the schedule is always different. You could even point towards trivial differences like the weather. Essentially, it's impossible to prove a theory when constants are always changing. The best anyone can do is postulate that the relationship would occur regardless of the changing constants. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Using the scientific method, I'm hypothesizing that mindfulness is the easiest and most effective form of performance enhancement. So on to real life examples. No more Kung Fu Panda examples. There are many people, many famous people who use mindfulness in sports. Most notably, Phil Jackson and Pete Carroll. Phil Jackson is one of the most famous NBA coaches of all time, and he's known as the Zen Master for his mindful training. Pete Carroll is an NFL coach who recently won the Super Bowl with the Seahawks. He recognizes the rigors of the NFL and holds mandatory meditation sessions so that his players can slow down and monitor their own thoughts. So for the sake of time, I'm solely going to focus on Phil Jackson. He retired now, holds the highest winning percentage of any NBA coach in the history of the NBA. It's 70.4%. And it's not like he coached for 1 year. He coached for a total of 20 years and won 11 championships. In a league full of teams, 30 teams, winning more than half the time is an absurd rate. So it's only natural to wonder what made Jackson's team so good. What was he doing differently that other teams weren't doing? The answer is that on top of physical training, he routinely had his team participate in mindfulness-based exercise. He was quoted as saying, "As much as we pump iron and we run to build our strength up, we need to build our mental strength up so we can focus, so we can be in concert with one another." Jackson held practices under unique circumstances. He often impaired the players' senses in order to help them understand the power of their senses. One practice, Jackson dimmed the lights and had his players simulate a game. The hope was that when he turned the lights back on, his players would truly understand and utilize their sense of sight. Another practice, Jackson insisted that it be talking free. He claimed there's a lot of chatter in basketball, and rightfully, you want players to be talking to each other, but sometimes in practice it gets too verbose. So I tried to take things out of the ordinary and make them special so they'd understand the difference. Jackson guided his players through an enlightening experience. He impaired the players' senses just so that they could see their senses for what they were, as tools that would eventually help them improve in basketball. The fact of the matter is that these tools of sight and communication are truly naturally occurring and always present in the game of basketball. From this perspective, attention to the senses seems not only obvious but essential for coaches to recognize and understand. Some coaches do recognize and understand, and those coaches are good, but Jackson was great because he trained his players at it. He used mindfulness-based exercises as a literal training mechanism for sensory awareness. Across the league, many head coaches in the NBA hire assistant coaches, trainers, specialty coaches like shooting coaches, rebounding coaches, all kinds of coaches. And Jackson was the only guy in the league to hire a meditation coach. He hired a guy named George Mumford. Mumford summed up the benefits of mindfulness effectively. He explained, when you're mindful of what's going on, there's a lack of self-consciousness. There's a relaxed concentration, and there's a sense of effortlessness, being in the flow. When we're in the moment and absorbed with the activity, we play our best. That happens once in a while, but it happens more often when we learn how to be mindful. By mindful, I mean being aware, being engaged in the present moment. Mindfulness is useful because it is through this that we can see what's going on. It means knowing what needs to happen and doing it. So, opponents of Phil Jackson are quick to say, well, anyone could have won with Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant on their team. But the truth of the matter is that Kobe Bryant has played in the NBA for 18 years, only 11 of which were for Phil Jackson. And he's 5 for 11 in championships with Phil Jackson and 0 for 7 without him. Michael Jordan has played in the league for 15 years. He's one of the most famous basketball names of all time, probably the most famous. And he's only won championships with Phil Jackson. He's won 6 out of 8 with Phil Jackson and 0 out of 7 without him. The fact of the matter is, Jackson has had a winning record every year as head coach. He has the highest winning percentage in the regular season and the postseason. It's hard to fathom that one coach can be so much better than the other coaches in a league consisting of 30 innovative coaching minds. There has to be an explanation, a difference in his approach to coaching. That's where the scientific method in mindfulness comes in. The independent variable is use of mindfulness through a coaching change, and the dependent variable is championships. The relationship can be defined as such when Phil Jackson, the Zen master, is coaching, keeping in mind that the crucial inherent difference in his coaching style is his use of mindfulness. Then the team, be it the Bulls or the Lakers, are more likely to win a championship. So forgetting about Phil Jackson, people remain critical of mindfulness as a method of increasing sports performance. The reason being that people are quick to point out that regulation of emotions and mental capacity is not a new phenomenon. After all, traditional psychological regulation tactics include imagery, self-talk, and goal setting. Study of these traditional forms of psychological regulation cause room for doubt. People argue that such emotion-regulating strategies, like imagery, self-talk, and goal setting, are attempting to control negative internal states. People argue that attempting to control negativity will ironically increase its occurrence by priming athletes to search for and focus on it. In other words, conscious awareness of negative thoughts and feelings can be distracting from the primary goal of athletic success. I'm in total agreement. These arguments are valid, as improper regulation of mentality can lead to obsession and distraction. However, people who make such claims are unaware of the distinction between mindfulness and other forms of mental regulation. The whole purpose of mindfulness-based training is to attack that very tendency to obsess and distract. The reason mindful training exists is because in every moment of our lives, we are mentally regulating ourselves. Whether we practice imagery, self-talk, and goal setting or not, we're constantly filtering thoughts and feelings. It is the nature of humans to focus on change, be it negative or positive. So in relating it to sports, our emotions are often determined by the score in a game. This focus on results multiplies the stress signals in our body because we're drifting from present moment awareness. The very purpose of mindfulness is to maintain that even keel. It's to perform the same in every second of the game. To not let chants from the crowd or chirps from the other team affect the figurative distance between yourself and winning. Mindfulness mitigates the natural inclination for athletes to focus on emotions, primarily negative emotions. So this leads directly into the reason that I chose the topic of mindfulness in sports performance. The purpose of the CES is to literally be a culminating experience. Fittingly, like JLo said, two big influences in my life have been my awareness and work with mindfulness, and then my participation and dedication to athletics. Many people in this room who probably know me well know a lot about my interest in athletics, but don't know as much about my interest in mindfulness. Well, over the last 3 to 4 years, I've practiced various forms of mindfulness. I've practiced typical forms of mindfulness training like meditation, but typically my familiarity with mindfulness comes from research solely done to fulfill my curiosity. I have strong opinions on religion and spirituality, and through research, I began to recognize mindfulness, or lack thereof, as the driving force behind why people do what they do and believe what they believe. A couple of teachers recommended to me today that I lead a meditation, but I don't really believe that meditation works for everyone, especially for beginners, because I think in learning to conceptualize meditation on your own terms, I think learning to conceptualize meditation on your own terms is necessary. It's a necessary first step before actually practicing meditation. Because frequently when beginners meditate, they are expecting something to happen, or not expecting something to happen. But the whole point of meditation is that you should sit there not expecting anything. It takes faith to meditate, because inherent in mindfulness, and distinct from the traditional methods of mental regulation, lies a profound paradox. You can't pursue it for its benefits. That's because the expectation of reward launches a future-oriented mindset. It subverts the entire process. Instead, you just have to trust that the rewards will come and live in the moment. So ironically, letting go of what you want and what you desire is the only way to get it. It's a paradigm-shifting notion that's the central tenet of a commonly misconstrued practice. All in all, opposition of mindfulness and the inability to meditate is frequently rooted in misunderstanding of its purpose and value. So instead of leading a meditation, I'd rather show a video that can hopefully be eye-opening.
There is no ego apart from the thoughts. The thoughts, identification with thoughts, is ego. But the thoughts that go through your mind, of course, are linked to the collective mind of the culture you live in, humanity as a whole. So they are not your thoughts as such, but you pick them up from the collective, most of them. And so you identify with thinking, and the identification with thinking becomes ego, which means simply that you believe in every thought that arises, and you derive your sense of who you are what your mind is telling you who you are. Opinions, viewpoints, that's me. That's some people talk to themselves and then you are, oh, you are so good. Why doesn't the world recognize you? Or the mind says, you're no good. Same thing. You're no good at all. You fail at everything, don't you? Again, and then you believe in it. And then you suddenly have a low view of yourself. Why you have a low view? Because you believed in your thoughts. And why are you thinking those thoughts? Probably you picked them up somewhere, maybe in childhood. Maybe your mom was so stressed out that you said you're no good. And so you pick up certain thoughts and they get stuck in your head. Thoughts that you hear in childhood. They're little energy forms, like entities. And they get stuck in your head and don't refuse to go. They go. And the more you believe in it, the more lodged, more deeply lodged they become in your mind. And so some people are stuck with very hostile entities. I'm saying entity, not in some spooky way, but every thought is an energy form, and as such we could call it an entity. And there are many people in this world who are stuck with hostile, life-denying, continuously critical and attacking entities that they carry in their head, and they believe that is who they are. And they are continuously attacking themselves. And if they're not attacking themselves, they attack others around them. Let me tell you who you are. Of course, what they're really saying is, let me tell you who I am. So they protect the famous, the famous saying, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. Which means you look at reality through the screen of your thinking and your judgment, which is conditioned by the past. A dreadful prison to live in. It's like blinkers, worse than blinkers. It's like looking at reality through heavy veils. So the identification with thinking, believing in your thoughts, having no space outside of the movement of thought. Again, here we come to the final thing, lack of space inside. That is the unconscious condition, spiritually, completely unconscious. And then you are burdened with that heavy ego. You are the ego, which is not an entity apart from thought. It is thoughts that you have identified with. And the first moment of freedom comes when you realize that certain thoughts have been going through your head for years, perhaps, and that they are only thoughts, and that you are not the thought, you are the awareness. Everybody's life, things in daily life, things go wrong, you miss a bus, you get stuck in a traffic jam, or you lose some money. But yes, this is normal, but if you haven't thought bad things always happen to me, you're extremely aware of those things, and they confirm to you that the thought is correct. And this is a selective perception of reality through the screen of thinking. So the reality will confirm to you, and not only that, that thought or any thought of that kind actually attracts bad things, negative things. So freedom comes from stepping out, encountering, first of all, a little bit of space inside your presence. And then from there you realize certain thoughts as repetitive and just a thought. Bad things always happen to me. Oh, there it goes again. Just thought that before. So that's to become free of ego means becoming free of thought, identification with thought. That's the end of the ego. It may reassert itself from time to time, but at least that's the awakening.
So that video is the kind of thing that makes me think. It helps me understand why quantifiable physical measurements, like strength and speed, aren't necessarily the answer to athletic success. It's great that so much effort is put into physical training, but there's still the mental aspect of life that applies to sports. As shown in the video, thoughts and identification with thoughts can mean everything. Straying a little from my thesis, I found mindfulness because I often wondered why we're here. How can we quantify life? Why is life a thing? While we can predict the speed of light, we can't directly tell why light exists. Sure, someone could say the sun emits light. Well, why is the sun there? Because of the Big Bang. Well, why did the Big Bang occur? Someone might say the collision of molecules. what produced the existence of molecules. Every question leads to a series of more questions. Tondi, Giulio, and I were actually talking about this a couple nights ago. We formed a graph of humanity over the last couple of days as a method of explaining my appeal to mindfulness. The x-axis on this graph represents time, from 0 to infinity, assuming 0 is the beginning of humanity. The y-axis represents scientific discovery, measured in units of knowledge. So the graph intends to show that as time goes on, our knowledge increases, and we seemingly get closer and closer to the ultimate answer of why we exist. Why anything exists, really. And it's apparent that with every discovery, we get closer and closer to the truth. So, like maybe around this time, Copernicus discovered that the world's heliocentric and the Earth revolves around the sun as opposed to the sun revolving around the Earth. And maybe in this time, we discovered that the Big Bang happened and that we're really just star stuff. But, you know, we're working our way up. The problem is that the truth is an asymptote because there's always going to be more and more questions. Now, there's always going to be a space between absolute truth and scientific discovery. Of course, over the course of humanity, the space in between truth and scientific discovery has always been filled with religion. People seek answers for creation, so they have faith in a story surrounding whatever religion or God they believe in, and it satisfies them. It works. Because faith in existence is in itself a powerful driving force. The effectiveness of faith in religion is, in a sense, a science. If you are to unconditionally believe, you are likely to be ignorant of this space, and moreover be immune to the feelings associated with understanding that this space exists. While I don't agree with religious stories about creation, I understand that religion serves a purpose in this world because it fills the space. Personally, I'm not faithful to a particular religion, because in my opinion, individual religions are often overlaid with extraneous matter that often obscure its spiritual substance. But in wanting to remain spiritual, I choose to be mindful of the space. My faith lies solely in existence. In thinking about the question of why we're here, the only thing that we can truly be sure about is our perception from moment to moment. After all, we're all here right now. And while we might be able to track how we got here scientifically, we can't answer the question of why science exists. In a sense, being mindful of these principles is the very basis of my beliefs. You might as well call mindfulness my religion. I accept unconditionally that the only thing I can be sure about is my present moment awareness. What I'm talking about is my own philosophy. However, I understand that in an exploration of truth, everyone finds purpose as it relates to their own perspective. So you might be asking yourselves why I shared my religious and spiritual views with you. How does it relate to mindfulness and affecting sports performance? Well, my perspective and philosophy led to my discovery of mindfulness. And interestingly enough, the same is the case for Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson also discovered mindfulness as a solution to accepting the metaphorical asymptote of truth. While he never asked his players to incorporate mindfulness into their perspective on creation, he did ask them to incorporate mindfulness into their perspective on basketball. He wanted them to find bliss in the game of basketball by playing the game in the present moment. As a coach, this graph didn't matter to him. He didn't care if his players understood why they were mindful. He just simply made sure that they were mindful. He taught his players to be in the here and now. He designed practices encouraging his players to utilize their own sensory perceptions of what's happening in the moment. All in all, he trained them to increase their awareness, which in turn reduced their egos and helped them win basketball games. So we've come full circle. The reason I chose the question, where can an advantage in athletics be most easily and effectively gained, is because I've always been an athlete. But until recently, I never thought to incorporate my faith in mindfulness with my passion in athletics. I'm not gonna lie, while having prior knowledge about the success of Phil Jackson made my essential question all the more convenient, I didn't choose my question based on Phil Jackson. I I really wanted answers to the question driving my thesis. And over the past couple months, upon studying Phil Jackson and his philosophies, I've essentially confirmed my faith in mindfulness and convinced myself that mindfulness is the most effective means of performance enhancement.
We have maybe a minute for a question or two, if anyone has them. And then we need to clear the space.
Has Phil Jackson ever publicly stated that paradox of the successes that he can account for in his career and in his teams, and the lack of goal setting of being present?
Yes.
The championships are not the goal. That in fact is the universe. And so has he said that publicly? I mean, that's what it
Yeah.
says intrinsically, but.
He, you know, a lot of coaches say that. A lot of coaches say that, you know, you should be in the present moment when you're playing sports. But, and Phil Jackson is one of those people. He's quoted many times, but the difference between him and the other coaches really was that he had his teams practice mindfulness. He had his teams practice at that skill.
Mhm.
And some coaches are aware of it, but don't practice it.
Right.
That's the difference.
So then they also don't have the goals in mind. I mean, in a way, championships don't matter.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to ignore the fact that you want a championship, but
Right.
but the idea is to play the first game of the season like it's the last game of the season, and the last game like it's the first game.
So I think that's all the time we have. We have people waiting outside, but thank you. That's great.